I had to know. I had to see it for myself. After a baffling reveal, then surprisingly good early impressions, I needed to see how it got to this point. I consider myself a pretty big Life is Strange fan. I was 5 or so years older than Max and Chloe when I first played through the first Life is Strange. Luckily that didn't matter. I was still in a fairly impressionable point of my life, so when I got to the end, to the choice, it had me bawling. From the exciting mystery to the heartbreaking climax to the incredibly awkward dialogue, I was fully engrossed. I played Life is Strange a few years after it came out, which allowed me to play through the whole experience in about 2 sittings. For the sequel, I opted to do the same. After every episode was released, and if I remember correctly, was on a bit of a sale, I picked up the game and experienced the entire story over the course of a few days. And let me say, Life is Strange 2 is fantastic. My favorite in the series to this day. Perhaps it had something to do with me partially sharing the 2 protagonists' ethnic background, or maybe because I, too, am an eldest sibling. Even without finding ways to relate, the journey these 2 kids were forced into was poignant. An elder brother doing his best to care for his younger, superpowered brother, while seemingly the whole world is after them, was tough. The game touches upon police brutality, subtle and overt racism, and strained sibling dynamics effortlessly. I got what I believe to be the best ending in the game. One where I had Sean be as positive an influence as he could possibly be. Where he did his best to try and raise Daniel right, despite the barrage of hurdles thrown their way. And it was so sad, heart-wrenching, bittersweet. Pondering it for even just a moment sparks the tear ducts in my eyes. I got the best ending, but there was no good ending for these brothers. That was the last Life is Strange title worked on by Don't Nod. They've gone on to make a bunch of other games I never got around to. I've heard mixed things of most of them. After they left, Square Enix tapped Deck 9 to continue the Life is Strange series, apparently having proved themselves with the Life is Strange prequel Before the Storm. I never played Before the Storm. At the time I was put off that the voice acting was performed by Scab labor, but there were no ongoing strikes during the development of True Colors, and when the reviews came back surprisingly positive, I decided I'd love to have a little narrative adventure again. True Colors was really nice. The game was gorgeous, the impossibly idyllic Colorado town was a joy to exist in, and it was refreshing to play a game in this genre that featured honest-to-goodness adults. And the story it told was pretty solid, despite the troubled work environment during development, despite the truly heinous imagery and plot elements that existed early on. The good folks on the development team fought and won and created a very interesting story. Then they announced Double Exposure, featuring Max from the Life is Strange series. Why? Her story was over? This is supposed to be an anthology series? The more I learned, the more baffled I became. She didn't even have the same powers? It's trying to be a proper sequel? It would have been infinitely easier to invent a new girl with new powers. They didn't. But they also apparently nailed it? When those first 2 chapters released and people like Janet Garcia and Patrick Klepek were high on it, oh, okay, Deck 9. Go off, I guess. Seems like y'all managed it. I went from being incredulous about the concept to looking forward to playing it. Then I saw Janet post about it after beating it, which is when I went from being curious to needing to play it. Early on, I found myself really enjoying Double Exposure. I quickly fell in love with Maxine and became fully invested in the mystery the game posed. There was a sizable yet manageable cast of characters, some immediately unlikable, others wholly endearing. Yet they all had room to breathe, the events of the early game already skewing some of my initial impressions. And the key puzzle mechanic, Max's newly updated power to swap between two near-identical dimensions, is really fun. The concept isn't new by any means, but the early puzzles utilized it well. It was fun being able to dimensionally eavesdrop on a couple of goons, or grabbing a stepladder from one dimension and bringing it to the other. Did the game need to be about Max? Not really. It seemed almost like the game began ideation with a new protagonist, then at some point someone in the chain of command decided to retrofit the current story to be about the first game's girl. It didn't feel necessary, it was mainly used as a shortcut to develop pathos. But it almost didn't matter. I deeply wanted to see where the game was going. Like any good mystery, I wanted to see it solved. But then I would worry. The main reason I played the game so early was because the premise was purportedly wasted. How? How could they fumble this bag? Note, I wrote this while still midway through Chapter 2. My biggest worry was that they would try to do an Avengers thing. If Daniel or Alex from the previous games decided to show up, I'd be livid. Or could they have gone too far with the dimensional thing? The game must have started development right when the multiverse was a hot concept, and within Chapter 2 there's already at least 3 distinct dimensions. Could Deck 9 have gone too far down that rabbit hole? Or maybe it just got sloppy. It's so easy to set up a bunch of mysteries, it's much harder to resolve them. Did they just lose sight of the runway? And then I beat the game. By the time I reached those final 2 chapters, I already felt underwhelmed, felt a complete lack of catharsis. And then the splash card, Max Caulfield will return, appeared on screen. I audibly groaned. Life is Strange Double Exposure went wrong in multiple ways. It failed as a choose-your-own narrative game. It failed as a story with a strong narrative. It failed as a story with a fulfilling/gratifying mystery. Never, in a Life is Strange game, have the choices mattered less. Of course, most of the choices in games past have always been more to color the narrative than to actually affect it. The original ends with a bay or bay binary after all, but even then, this title's choices have a hard time even achieving that. Throughout the previous games, smaller decisions felt like they made an impact upon certain characters and their relationship to the protagonist. Did Max accidentally lead on that kid before ultimately kissing Chloe? Was she able to talk the teen off of the ledge? Did Alex overuse her empathy trying to help the florist? How many of the town residents trusted her when it was time to prove her case? Did the police find Sean and Daniel because Sean had to send a letter to his friend? How well did he raise his brother? Did Daniel ultimately listen to him when it mattered most? Even when the game's ending ultimately leads to a single choice, how that choice is arrived at matters so much. Double Exposure is bereft of these choices. One of the earliest decisions has Max choosing a mug. I was a little shocked when the sound alert in the text, "This choice will matter," appeared on the screen. How would which mug Max chose affect the case later on? Would it be used as evidence somehow? Would it be different in one of the alternate dimensions? No. Categorically, the answer is no. She uses that mug for that scene, and it is never brought up again. There is even a moment later on where a mug is embedded within a tree, a prime opportunity for Max's earlier decision to come up in even a very minor way, but the mug embed is the one Max's friend Sophie drank from. Max's mug has zero bearing. Where the mug is a minor choice, larger ones have impacts just as minute. Does Max agree to work with Detective Alderman? If yes, it affects a small exchange of dialogue at the end of the chapter. If no, well, that dialogue is omitted. Alderman is furious at the start of the next, regardless. Speaking of Alderman, does Max punch him in the face to save herself, or does she try to save him, resulting in Moses having to come to the rescue? Alderman is slurped up regardless, his impact on the story quite literally eradicated from the game. The only difference is, if choosing the latter option, Moses gets a small streak of white in his hair. A streak that is gone by the end of the game. Every decision is like this. The most impactful in the entire runtime is if Max chooses to notify Safi about Lucas's restraining order. A live world Lucas is either grateful towards her throughout the rest of the game, or livid, and no matter his disposition towards Max, she always has to sneak into his office later. She is always able to convince him to give his presentation, nor does it matter how many people Max convinces to go against him. Their revolution always succeeds when Safi takes stage. Even the two choices during Max's final confrontations with Safi don't alter the narrative even the slightest bit. Safi will always shoot Yasmin, her mom. Max always ends the storm Safi created, merging both timelines. Safi always leaves, whether or not Max agrees with her or not. No decision in Double Exposure has a lasting impact, no matter how major, no matter how minor. It is impossible to roleplay when the script is set in stone, and for that it fails as a choose-your-own-adventure. But Life is Strange is a character and narrative-forward series. Even if the decisions lack impact, it can still succeed as long as the story being told and the people within are interesting. Double Exposure falls apart spectacularly in this regard. I think the most demonstrable choice in Double Exposure's production was the pivot to make the game about Maxine Caulfield. To look at the positive first, it worked decently enough to jumpstart the pathos of the story. The game was able to navigate around the choice from the first game with a fair bit of grace, and now I am entering this new mystery with another game's worth of backstory for the main protagonist. This immediate pathos is, of course, why direct sequels exist in the first place, so that the audience has an easier time buying in with less introduction. But to Tech 9's credit, they were able to initially succeed despite following up another team's game that had quite the definitive ending. And as I mentioned earlier, the first two chapters did an excellent job introducing the new cast and sparking a fascinating mystery. But nothing happens with said characters, and the mystery keeps adding twist after twist and almost forgets to introduce answers. After the inciting incident, the death of Safi and subsequent splitting of dimensions, the initial chapters focus on Max and Moses as they work on solving this mystery while avoiding the ire of Alderman, the detective who suspects they both have a hand in the murder. Quite fascinating stakes. Max has to convince Moses of the alternate timelines, finds a photo of herself committing the murder, and now must solve it before she's caught instead. Until the storyline is dropped entirely. It is literally erased from the universe along with Alderman. Any prior tension was ultimately used to introduce the danger of not touching your dimensional echo, a danger that is never mentioned again. Not only does this moment invalidate the previous chapter's events, but it also leaves Moses in that dimension with nothing to do. For half the game, one of the three main protagonists of the story is left to wallow in sorrow along the perimeter. And the stakes of said story were resolved in the least satisfying way possible. After that moment, the game pivots to a live Safi in the other dimension, but the table stakes for this half of the adventure were not nearly as interesting. Ultimately, they are a pseudo-rehash of the abusive teacher narrative, sort of mirroring Jeffrey's abuse from the first game, but done so with a funhouse mirror and with much less emotional stakes for Max. For the backstory, a few years prior, Lucas plagiarized the work of Safi's friend Maya, eventually leading to Maya killing herself. Safi's own book deal was cancelled during the first chapter. Fueled by rage, she has blamed Lucas for both and is set on taking revenge. But while it mirrors the events from the first, it is nowhere near as impactful. Maya's story is somber, but Lucas plagiarizing her work is not as evocative as Jeffrey abducting, drugging, raping, and murdering his victims. Additionally, where Max immediately had a connection to Rachel through Chloe, Maya is hardly brought up during the first half of the game. Safi's anger was righteous, but the game didn't do enough for Max to empathize with that anger, if only her superpower was empathy. The twist of Yasmin ultimately being responsible for the book's cancellation was a good idea. Safi misplacing rage towards Lucas and her former mentor Gwen, only for the culprit to be her abusive mother, is good on paper, but the anger is only slightly misplaced. Lucas is still very much a bad person. He was supposed to be the initially vile character that had a redemption arc. Rough on the surface, but with a heart of gold. But his actions led to Maya's death, rendering him irredeemable. This is a melodrama. The swings need to be big. If Yasmin is the one at fault, she needs to be the truly vile one. But in this story, Lucas is still the worst character. Yasmin is a mother that misunderstands her daughter and made a mistake. Even with the mistake being to protect Lucas, protecting an abuser is not worse than being the abuser. Finally, back to the biggest culprit, Maxine herself. Alderman's schlorping is the tangible moment where the team pivoted. Now, instead of being about Safi's mysterious murder, it's about Maxine from Life is Strange. Characters are not able to grow in this title because it's about Maxine. The story is not able to resolve because it's about Maxine. And a story about Maxine has to also be about Chloe Price. Safi heading off to create the X-Men was a big hint. The end title, Max Caulfield will return, was another. The announcement of Reunion was the final confirmation. Double Exposure is not a standalone story. It is a prequel to Reunion, and as such, nothing is able to happen. Its job was to introduce a scenario for Chloe to return. It eschewed any interesting narrative threads to create a situation where Chloe was saved and the Arcadia Bay storm was subverted. I even enjoy the idea of Max rejecting the binary choice of killing Safi or sacrificing the town. I love narratives where characters reject the options they're given and fight for a better future. But everything leading up to this moment was forced, and everything after it was undeserved. Why Max was the one who initially shot Safi was never adequately explained. Why the dimensions split in twain is never even touched upon. And the milquetoast, everybody's okay and vaguely remembers both timelines and nobody has any drastic consequences, ending is as flat as can be. I didn't even mention that Safi can shapeshift into people she knows well, because it almost doesn't matter. Her misuse of the power causes the storm, I guess, maybe Maxine fixes it, and Safi doesn't learn anything from the situation, because, presumably, Safi will properly learn the lesson in the game that also has Chloe in it. Ultimately, Double Exposure was a game that set up a situation for Max to confront her past, which to Deck 9 means confronting Chloe, and by pivoting to a story that would allow every player to expect Chloe to return, the game floundered. It lost track of its intrigue, forgot about half of the cast, and revoked any narrative impact the player could have. The original Life is Strange has a beautiful ending. It's a game where both choices have their staunch defenders, and both are justified in their opinions. But Deck 9 has decided, whether through their own creative musings or through Square Enix corporate mandating, that Max and Chloe's ending wasn't good enough. So they created and released a game as a stopgap for their own go at one. And there is nothing more disgraceful than playing the middle chapter to a story that shouldn't be told. Thank you for watching. Apparently Lost Records Bloomin' Rage was a whiff, Life is Strange Reunion has a bad premise, and that 80s nostalgia of that Annapurna mixtape game is poison to me. Things are looking bleak for good narrative-focused choose-your-adventure games, but let me know your thoughts in the comments. Rate and subscribe if you're feeling it. Follow me on my socials where I'm at Mario8th if you wanna. Links in the description. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.